Vladimir Sergeyevich always believed that love wasn't about words, but actions. He wasn't good at grand pronouncements, but he was good at getting up at 5 in the morning to make it to a side job, good at lugging heavy grocery bags, good at fixing everything that broke, and buying everything that was needed. Alina was born late, when he was already over 30. He remembered that day in every detail, the smell of the hospital corridor, mixed with bleach and something sweet, as if someone had opened a can of condensed milk somewhere. He remembered how his hands trembled when he first held her. A tiny bundle that snorted and wrinkled her nose, and he already knew, now everything in his life would be for her sake. The first years were like a dream. He would come home from work and, without even taking off his jacket, would scoop her into his arms. She would laugh, grab his ears, reach for his face. He could sit on the floor for hours, building towers of blocks, just to see her gleefully destroy them. In the summer, they would take the train to the river. The water there was cold, with a scent of algae, but Alina would squeal with joy when he picked her up and tossed her in the air. She would splash, spray him, and he would laugh, feeling that this was happiness. In the winter, he would pull her on a sled through the snowy streets. The snow crunched underfoot, their breath turned into steam, and his fingers would go numb, but he wouldn't stop until she would say, "Dad, enough, I'm tired." When she started school, he bought her a backpack with sparkly inserts and a pencil case with a kitten. In the evenings, they would do homework together. He patiently explained math, even though he could barely stand on his feet after work. Vladimir Sergeyevich was always there for her. When she got sick in the 3rd grade, he sat by her bed all night, changing the towel on her forehead, listening to her breathing. When she fell off her bike for the first time and scraped her knee, he picked her up, carried her home, and, while treating the wound, told funny stories to keep her from crying. He remembered how, once, when she was about 10 years old, they went to Sochi. It was their first trip to the sea. He had bought her a swimsuit with bright flowers, an inflatable flamingo float, and a small bucket for sand in advance. They stayed in a small guest house where the mornings smelled of coffee and fresh pastries. That day, the sea was warm, with gentle waves. Alina ran to the water, squealing with delight, and he followed, holding a towel. She built sandcastles, decorating them with seashells, and he helped, making straight walls and deep moats. "Dad," she said then, "when I grow up, we'll definitely go to the sea again. Just the two of us." He smiled and promised, "Of course, Alina." He carried these words in his heart for many years. Spring in the city always came slowly. The snow had already melted, but the smell of melting water and wet asphalt still hung in the morning air. Janitors lazily swept up the last of the sand that had been used to sprinkle the sidewalks in winter, and people stood at the bus stops in light jackets, but still with their collars turned up. Vladimir Sergeyevich was returning from work when the phone rang. The screen showed Alina. He always answered her immediately, even if he was in the store, on public transport, or in a meeting. "Dad," her voice was tired, but with a spark, "I really want to go to the sea." He smiled, although she couldn't see it. "Then let's go together. I'll pay." She laughed, and in that laughter, he heard the same little girl who had once run along the beach in Sochi, waving a bucket. In the evening, he sat down at the computer. The tour operator websites were filled with photos, golden sand, turquoise water, white lounge chairs. He chose carefully, as if he wasn't just buying a trip, but a piece of happiness. He wanted everything to be perfect: a hotel right by the sea, breakfast overlooking the waves, a clean beach. He imagined how they would sit on the shore, listening to the sound of the surf, eating fresh fruit. How she would tell him about her work, her plans, and he about what he had read, what he had seen. The next day, he went to a suitcase store. The saleswoman showed him a model with sturdy wheels and a bright turquoise body. "For my daughter," he said, and his voice was filled with pride. At home, he took out an old notebook in which he had once recorded expenses. Now he kept a list of what he needed to take: sunscreen, a hat, light shirts, a camera. He even bought himself new sandals, although he usually wore old, time-tested ones. In the evenings, he went online, watched videos about the city they were going to. He memorized the names of streets, cafes, markets. He wanted to show her places where she could try fresh seafood, where they sold sweets with honey and nuts. Sometimes he caught himself smiling for no reason at the thought that soon they would be together, without rushing, without chores. But a week before departure, the phone rang again. "Dad," her voice was cautious, I'm going to take a friend with me. You don't mind, do you? We've just been wanting to go together for a long time." He was silent. He could hear her hurriedly explaining that it would be more fun that way, that he doesn't like the heat anyway. "I understand," he said quietly. He hung up and sat in silence for a long time. On the table was the list of things he was going to take. He ran his finger down the lines, then closed the notebook. That evening, he didn't turn on the light. He sat by the window, listening to the street noise below, and thought about how sometimes promises made in childhood dissolve like footprints in the sand after the tide. The morning of the departure was sunny. Light streamed through the thin curtains in his apartment, and the dust in the air seemed golden. Vladimir Sergeyevich woke up early, even though he hadn't set an alarm. He knew that Alina was already in a taxi, heading to the airport. He imagined her sitting in the back seat, scrolling through her phone, and next to her, the friend with whom they had wanted to go together for a long time. The suitcase with the turquoise body that he had bought was neatly placed in the trunk. In the kitchen, he brewed coffee. Hot steam rose from the mug, but the smell seemed more bitter than usual for some reason. He sat down at the table, opened his laptop, and mechanically went to social media. The first photo, Alina at the airport, in a light jacket, with a smile he remembered from childhood. The caption, "Onward, to the sun." He closed his laptop. The day dragged on slowly. He tried to read a book, but the words blurred. He turned on the TV. There was an old movie on, where the characters were going to the sea. He turned it off. In the evening, the first photo from the beach arrived, golden sand, turquoise water, cocktails with umbrellas. She was standing in a hat he had bought her last year, laughing. Next to her, a friend, hugging her by the shoulders. He stared at the screen for a long time. He felt a strange feeling in his chest, not anger, not envy, but emptiness. As if someone had taken something important out of him and left only the shell. The next day, he went to the store for bread. At the checkout, the saleswoman he had known for many years asked, "Well, Vladimir Sergeyevich, didn't you go to the sea?" He smiled, but the smile was crooked. It didn't work out. At home, he sat by the window. It was raining outside, and there was something in that noise that resembled the surf. He closed his eyes and imagined he was sitting on the beach. But in that imaginary sea, there was no sun. Only a gray sky and cold waves. In the evening, he went to social media again. More photos, Alina on a catamaran, Alina with a plate of seafood, Alina in an evening dress against the backdrop of the sunset. Not a single message to him. Not a single call. He remembered how, once, in Sochi, she ran to him along the beach, holding a seashell in her hand, and shouted, "Dad, look how beautiful. It's for you." Now, she was probably giving the seashells to her friend. That night, he couldn't sleep for a long time. He lay in the dark, listening to the rain dripping outside, and thought that maybe the sea isn't a place, but the people you're with there. And if those people aren't around, then the sea loses its meaning. The day was cloudy, gray, with a low sky that seemed to press on the shoulders. Vladimir Sergeyevich woke up early, but didn't rush to get up. He lay looking at the ceiling and felt something heavy, viscous, building up inside. He remembered how a week ago Alina had returned from the sea. She didn't call right away, only on the third day. The conversation was short, dry. She said that everything was great, that the weather was super, and that we should go together sometime. But there was no warmth in her voice. He hung up then and realized something had changed. Not in her, in him. Vladimir Sergeyevich got up, brewed strong tea, and sat down at the table. On the table was a stack of receipts, bank statements, an old notebook with expenses. He flipped through the pages and saw how much had gone to help Alina in recent years. The amount was impressive. He didn't regret that money. But now he realized, he had stopped being a person for her, he had become a resource. The thought flashed through his head, I need to cut off access. It seemed sharp, almost cruel. But the longer he sat, the clearer he realized it wasn't cruelty, it was protection. He put on his coat, took a folder with documents, and went out. The bank was located in an old building with high ceilings and heavy doors. Inside, it smelled of coffee and paper. The queue was short. He approached the window behind which sat a young employee with a neat bun. How can I help you? She asked, smiling. I want to restrict access to my accounts, he said calmly. She raised her eyes. Completely? Completely. Only me. While she was typing, he looked out the window. It was drizzling outside, the glass was covered with thin streaks of drops. He thought that the rain was like his life now, quiet, but cold. Sign here, said the employee, handing him the papers. He took the pen. His hand trembled, but he signed. At that moment, he felt a strange relief. As if he had closed a door through which too many people had been entering without knocking for too long. Leaving the bank, he inhaled the cold air. There was emptiness in his chest, but this emptiness was different. Not from loss, but from the fact that he had finally stopped giving himself completely. The apartment where Alina lived always seemed special to him. He remembered every corner of it, because he had once chosen the tiles in the kitchen himself, painted the walls in the bedroom himself, and fussed with the door handles that kept jamming. Purchasing the apartment had been almost a heroic feat for him. He sold the dacha where he had once planted apple trees, withdrew all the savings he had been accumulating for old age, and registered the housing to his daughter. At the time, it seemed right, to give her a start, to make her feel secure. On the day they got the keys, Alina jumped for joy. Dad, it's ours, she said, and he didn't correct her. Now, sitting at home, he looked at the folder of documents and realized, the word ours had long disappeared. After the sea story, something broke inside him. The unconditional willingness to give everything was gone. He saw that their connection had become one-sided. The decision came quietly, without loud words. He simply realized, it was time to regain control. At the real estate agency, he was met by a woman in a strict suit. Do you want to sell? She clarified. Yes. Urgently? Yes. They discussed the price, the timing. He signed the papers, and at that moment he felt he was doing something irreversible. In the evening, he walked through the empty apartment. In the bedroom, light curtains that he had once chosen himself still hung. In the kitchen, there was a cup with a crack, her favorite. He ran his hand over the windowsill, looked out the window. I'm sorry, Alanaka, he said softly, but I can't go on like this anymore. He transferred the money from the sale to a new account that no one knew about. That evening, he sat by the window for a long time. It rained outside, and there was something in its noise that sounded like the surf. A sea he didn't have. Several months passed. Summer gave way to autumn, and autumn to early winter. The city became different, the trees shed their leaves, the air became clear and prickly, and a light fog enveloped the morning streets. Vladimir Sergeyevich lived quieter now than before. He stopped waiting for calls, stopped checking messengers in the hope of seeing a message from Alina. The phone still lay on the table, but it had become just an object, not a thread connecting him to someone. Sometimes he saw her on social media. New photos, parties, trips, smiles. He looked at them without the former pain. Just like pictures from someone else's life. The money from the sale of the apartment lay in the account. He was in no hurry to spend it. Sometimes he thought about going somewhere alone. Not to the sea, he wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe to the mountains, where the air smells of pine needles, and the silence rings in your ears. He started reading more in the evenings. There was always a kettle in the kitchen, and a mug of hot tea on the windowsill. Sometimes he sat by the window, looked at the street, and caught himself thinking that for the first time in a long time he felt calm. One day he walked along the embankment. The river was dark, almost black, and reflections of lanterns trembled on its surface. The wind brought the smell of dampness and something distant, resembling a sea breeze. He stopped, closed his eyes, and imagined that he was standing on the seashore. But now, in this imaginary sea, he was alone and it wasn't scary. He realized that the sea he didn't have was still with him. It lived in memories, in promises, in those days when they were together. And even if it now belonged only to him, it was fair. Vladimir Sergeyevich turned and went home. His steps were confident, and there was a quiet, even warmth in his chest.